The combination of Frank Ocean's captivating music and ability to keep such a tight lid on his public exposure drives his fans mad. They simply wish to know what the artist is up to on a consistent basis, which is a luxury we're so used to given the level of accessibility in today's digital age. Even with privacy becoming a has-been, Frank isn't quite ready to give in as he still remains the most alluring figure in pop culture. In this video, we're digging into the few clues Frank has given us thus far to try and unravel whether he will release another album to follow up his widely praised 2016 release Blonde and what that might look like. This is Tofu Media. During the 4 years that led up to the eventual release of Endless and Blonde in August of 2016, Frank kept all the preparation work very secretive. Many artists succumb to various leaks while preparing their albums, which can cause months or even years of delay. A prime example is Lil Uzi Vert's long-delayed Eternal Atake. But few if any songs by Frank ever leak, and it's not by chance. In an interview with New York Times a few months after Blonde's release, Frank explained how he carried physical hard drives of songs from both albums Blonde and Endless in his backpack at all times while traveling. He was even quoted saying, "I'd rather the plane goes down in flames and the drives go down with me than somebody put out a weird posthumous release." 3 years later, Frank again touched on this process in an interview with Dazed magazine, saying, "I carried my hard drives around with me when I traveled because I used to not store anything online. Those drives became a physical representation of the stakes. If the files had leaked, everything would have worked out very differently for me." The stakes he's referring to is how he managed to finesse his way out of a record contract right before releasing Blonde, so then he was technically independent, which allowed him to reap 100% of profits made. He did so by delivering his contractual final album for his then label Def Jam a day prior through the release of Endless, his visual album. Def Jam had no idea Blonde was dropping the next day. It was a bold move and required Frank to not let anything leak, including his songs as well as his plans, so he essentially told no one until its release. Obviously, Frank moves very secretively, as demonstrated in this James Bond-esque scheme, and even today he doesn't trust technology, recently mentioning during an interview how he's working with a string arranger in Rio, and when collaborating neither can use the internet, but instead Frank sends someone to Brazil with the hard drive or will physically take it there himself. The first activity since Blonde was in 2017 when Frank released a slew of loose tracks, enough to make up a short EP, with songs like Provider, Chanel, and Biking to name a few. But other than that, he had been relatively quiet, which didn't come as a surprise. But one moment we were given a peek into his musical direction was during a rare interview with W magazine in September 2019, where he provided an update on where his current state of mind is with both musical influences and his work process. In previous work, Frank never shied away from sharing personal and introspective feelings, but now it seems he's moving away from this, as he says in the interview how he doesn't necessarily think there is strength in vulnerability, but rather the phrase simply sounds wise to say, given the two alone are conflicting. He is quoted saying, "To satisfy expectation, there needs to be an outpouring of my heart, or my experiences, in a very truthful, vulnerable way. I'm more interested in lies than that, like give me a full motion picture fantasy." Aside from lyrical content, Frank mentions new directions sonically, saying how he has become interested in different iterations of nightlife music, feeling inspired by Detroit and Chicago house, as well as French electronic sounds, and continues to explain new work processes too, describing how he wants to move away from too much solo work as he has done previously, and instead spend more time working with session musicians, featured artists, or other record producers, noting that these are his most enjoyable parts of creating. The last interesting point during this interview is when Frank reflects upon the effect tech has had, and that it has essentially dictated the way music is produced today. He specifically points out the formatting seen with today's release music, explaining how no longer do we have the 45, 60, or 120-minute limits that constrained us in the past with the need for physical releases. As a result, the delivery of music is much more elastic now than ever before. Through this interview, it seems like Frank is thinking and toying with different ways he can deliver his music, something we were exposed to when he visually released Endless 4 years ago. We actually did witness a unique delivery with his most recent music too, which are speculated to be singles for his upcoming album. So far we have DHL, Dear April, Cayendo, and In My Room. All except DHL were initially released as a physical vinyl on Frank's website, with the studio original versions on side A and the respective remixes on side B. DHL, however, has no remix, therefore no vinyl. Both DHL and In My Room feature cover art of a posed Frank Ocean, as well as numerous silhouettes at the bottom. We also see individual silhouettes appear on both Dear April and Cayendo's cover art. These silhouettes could be a huge clue in discovering more about Frank's new album, and various theories have begun circulating. What I think is true is this. At the bottom of DHL, we see 13 silhouettes, where one silhouette represents one of the songs on the album, so 13 songs in total, and their order follow the order of the track listing. Matching the silhouettes we've seen thus far, In My Room is track 1, Cayendo is track 3, DHL is track 4, and Dear April is track 10. But then, at the bottom of In My Room, we see 17 silhouettes. The 13 from DHL are still there, but now an additional 4 popped up. These 4 represent the remixes. We already have 2 of the remixes, Dear April remixed by Justice and Kayondo remixed by Sango. Then the other 2 rumored remixes are In My Room featuring Benny Revival, as Frank shared a snippet on his Instagram story, and then Little Demon, which is remixed by Arca, and was first premiered on Halloween at Frank's prep party, but is yet to be officially released. We haven't even heard the non-remix version yet, and we never may, as one Reddit user who purchased the vinyl for Little Demon on Frank's website shared these pictures of a conversation they had with the distributor regarding its shipment. We see that Little Demon will actually be substituted with a new song. Of the 4 studio songs that have been officially released, Daniel Aged, a Los Angeles-based sessionist, has been heavily involved, credited as the sole producer on both Cayendo and Dear April, while also working alongside producers Boys Noise and Noah Goldstein for DHL. Aged has worked with numerous artists, including FKA Twigs, where he lended production and lyrical assistance on 3 of her songs from her debut album LP1 back in 2014. Aside from collaborations, Aged has one album of his own that was released in 2018. However, he remains undiscovered with just under 20,000 monthly listeners on Spotify, which in comparison to Frank Ocean's 14 million doesn't amount to many. But Frank knows what the talented LA musician can bring to the table. On his self-titled album, Daniel Aged plays soothing guitar melodies throughout the instrumental tape. His label said about his sound, "There is something unmistakably West Coast about the atmospheres of Daniel Aged. Slow motion propulsion along snaking vistas, shoreline euphoria touched with longing and melancholy, its humor, delicacy, depth, and clarity." This slow motion euphoria is heard on both Cayendo and Dear April when we hear Aged serving ambient sounds with his guitar flowing perfectly as support for Frank's strong vocals. Along with Daniel Aged, another producer I expect to see heavily involved on Frank's next project is Michael Uzi Azuru, a Nigerian-American producer from Cypress, California, produced Sir's Hair Down, Georgia Smith's February 3rd, and Anderson .Paak's Till It's Over. He also produced both Chanel and Nights for Frank, as well as In My Room and Little Demon, the latter which may not be released at all. When I listened to all the tracks mentioned above that Michael Uzi produced, I noticed they all carry a similar but unique sound. I would describe it as nostalgic fairy tale with some bounce. For Frank's next album, it's hard to be confident with predictions, but I have a well-educated guess. I think we're going to get 17 tracks in total, with 4 of them being remixes. I don't think we'll be getting as much personal lyricism as we're so used to with Frank, but do think he'll explore more vivid fictional storytelling like he often did on Channel Orange in tracks like Pyramids. As far as sound, I think he's going to regularly switch between electro, ambient noises, as heard on DHL, and softer, more acoustic tracks like Dear April and Cayendo, as I expect both Daniel Aged and Michael Uzi's footprint on a lot of these tracks. Finally, as to when we'll be getting this album, it's hard to say, but he was slated to perform at Coachella, so maybe he had planned on dropping, but then the festival was cancelled. But I will say, I think when it is delivered, it will be in some unconventional way, given his increasing interest in music formatting, as discussed earlier. With such a tight lid on every move he makes, it's hard to know when this treasured album will see its release. Frank has said that when you tell people what you're doing before it's done, it usually leads to non-positive things, since you're now accountable for what you had said, even if your creative thoughts have now changed. Quoted as saying, "It's usually better for me to make what I make, put it out or don't, and then talk about it freely." When analyzed, this ideology could sound bleak, as everything we've dug up may not be evidence at all if he's changing his thoughts, and the work we suspect Frank has begun to create may not even see the light of day. But us Frank Ocean fans are used to this type of torture and know that all we can do is keep hope. Let us know in the comments what you think of this prediction or when you think we'll get Frank's album. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe to see more like these. Thanks for watching.